on WeatherNet. Liftoff conditions looking pretty good.
ESPS is ready for launch.
Ignition. Liftoff.
Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Ten, 9, 8,
Side booster ignition.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, it's Friday, February 25th, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 that awaits its 9:12 a.m. Pacific time launch from Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base. My name is Andy Tran, and I'm joining you this morning from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California, as we launch another 50 Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. This marks our 8th launch of 2022, second launch this week, and the second launch from Vandy this month. Due to the increase in our launch cadence and as a result of the hard work of our teams, today's mission is the fastest launch-to-launch at Vandenberg Space Force Base for SpaceX to date, having supported the NROL 87 and Starlink missions all within the same calendar month. If you've been following SpaceX and Starlink, you might already know that Starlink is a constellation of multiple satellites that orbit the planet at about 550 kilometers. Because Starlink does not rely on traditional ground infrastructure, it is ideally suited for areas of the globe where connectivity has typically been a challenge or non-existent, such as rural or remote communities. Most recently, Starlink went live in Brazil and Bulgaria and is now available in 29 global markets. So a big congratulations to everyone on the Starlink team for these additional rollouts to Latin America and Europe. A bit later in the webcast, we'll talk about how our team is also helping residents of the island nation of Tonga reconnect after a volcanic eruption earlier this year. For now, let's take a closer look at the rocket supporting today's mission. What you see on your screen is a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket named after the 9 Merlin engines at the bottom of the first stage. Almost 70% of the entire rocket is comprised of the first stage, and its job is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space. The rocket on your screen may not look very big, but in fact our two-stage rocket stands 70 meters tall, which makes it almost as tall as the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Today's first stage will be flying for the 4th time, previously having supported NASA's DART, or Double Asteroid Redirection Test Mission, the Sentinel-6A Microflylic mission, and a past Starlink mission. We are going to be attempting to recover the first stage for the 4th time on our drone ship that you see on screen. This one's named, Of Course I Still Love You. The portion of the rocket on top of the first stage is the black carbon fiber inner stage. Due to its coloring, it's pretty hard to miss. The inner stage is a composite structure that not only connects the first and second stages, but also houses the pneumatic pushers that allow the stages to separate about 2.5 minutes into flight. On top of the inner stage is the Falcon 9 second stage. The second stage propels our payload to its desired orbit by utilizing the single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine that's revealed after stage separation. The MVAC engine will then ignite and carry the Starlink satellites to a low Earth orbit, or LEO. Although there is no universal standard for low Earth orbits, it typically refers to orbits that are less than 2,400 kilometers in altitude. In addition to our Starlink constellation, the International Space Station also travels in low Earth orbit around the Earth with an average altitude of about 400 kilometers. And at the very top of the rocket, you'll notice a large nose cone. This is called the payload fairing. Today's fairing is housing the 50 Starlink satellites and will protect them until the vehicle is outside of the Earth's atmosphere, at which point the fairing halves will separate to expose the satellites to the vacuum of space. Both fairing halves on today's Falcon 9 rocket are flying for the 3rd time, and we will be attempting to recover these halves again from the water once they return to Earth. So the live rocket sounds you may be able to hear from our launch pad are the pops and hissing sounds related to the propellant loading that started at the T-minus 35-minute mark. Our Falcon 9 vehicle uses 2 propellants, a refined form of kerosene called RP1, or rocket propellant 1, as a fuel, and liquid oxygen, or LOX, as an oxidizer. An oxidizer is a substance that a fuel requires in order to burn. The liquid oxygen is chilled well below its boiling point so that it has a much greater amount of mass per volume. That basically means that we can load more of it onto the rocket. In addition to these two propellants, we also use the chemical TTEB, or triethylaluminum and triethylborane, as an ignition source. The combustion of RP1 and LOX makes the rocket go, but it's TTEB that sets the match and uses the propellant to sets the match to the propellant mix. If we're using a barbecue analogy, you can think of RP1 and LOX as charcoal and the oxygen in the air, and the lighter is TTEB. And until you light that match, you won't have flame to cook your food or, for our purposes, lift off. We fill the LOX into the first and second stages to full as close to T0 as possible to minimize how long the LOX could start to warm up. This is similar to fueling your combustion car. You put your handle in, turn it on, and when it's full, the pump will automatically shut off. And as you can see on screen, the weather in Vandenberg is looking pretty good.
Stage 1, RP1
typically, we get a lot of clouds in Vandenberg, but the weather today is very favorable for liftoff. In addition to the weather, the range, vehicle, and satellites are all also trending green for an on-time liftoff at 9:12 a.m. Pacific time. If for some reason we don't lift off today, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow, about 20 minutes earlier than today. As you may have heard on the news, the Starlink teams responded to a volcanic catastrophe and tsunami earlier this year in the island nation of Tonga. For those of you who may not be familiar with Tonga, it's comprised of 169 islands and is located in the South Pacific Ocean, directly south of Samoa, in a very remote part of the world. Since the natural disasters earlier this year, the Starlink team was able to provide internet service to connect remote villages in Tonga that had been cut off as a result. The way Starlink was deployed is representative of one of the ways Starlink works best, in remote or rural areas where internet connectivity is sometimes unavailable. We hope to be able to help more communities in need like this in the future. If you're interested and want to know more about Starlink or want to see if its service is available in your area, head on over to starlink.com. As we continue to march down to T0, just under T-minus 5 minutes here, the next major milestone you're about to see on screen involves the transporter erector, or the TE, which is the truss structure next to the Falcon 9 vehicle. In preparation for retraction, the clamp arms underneath the fairing will start to open up, and then that structure next to Falcon 9 will begin to retract away to its pre-launch position. So this view right now, right underneath the fairing halves, you can see those clamp arms. In a few seconds here, we'll start to see those open up. The TE is also the structure that provides liquids, gases, and electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing. And on screen right now, you can see that those clamp arms are indeed opening up. It takes a few seconds for them to open up all the way, and once they are fully open, we'll start to see that truss structure next to Falcon 9 open up, or not open up, retract to its pre-launch position. There it goes. Closer to T0, the strongback will continue to retract further away and provide clearance for Falcon 9 to lift off. At this point, both the first and second stages are nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. And we have absolutely gorgeous weather in Vandenberg today, so we are expecting some great footage during ascent. You can see a little bit of that condensed liquid oxygen around Falcon 9.
Stage 1, LOX load is complete.
We vent the super chilled liquid oxygen, and when it meets the ambient air temperatures, it starts to condense and form those clouds that you see. This is pretty similar to if you were to have a ice cold cup of water sitting on your table. You start to see those beads of water form around the cup. It's a very similar interaction. So in about 30 seconds here, we are expecting to hear the call out for second stage LOX load complete. This will wrap up propellant loading for the entire vehicle. If you are just joining us, this is a Starlink mission. We have 50 Starlink satellites inside the fairing at the very top of the rocket. This is SpaceX's 8th mission of the year. Continuing to march towards T0, just under 2 minutes now. Again, the range, vehicle, and payloads are all looking healthy for an on-time liftoff, just about a minute and a half
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
from now. And there was the call out for stage 2 liquid oxygen loading complete. Again, that is the last of propellant loading. We're going to start to see more clouds start to form around Falcon 9. Again, we are venting that liquid oxygen and trying to top off the stages as much as possible to keep the propellant inside the rocket chilled. Normal and expected for us at this stage in the countdown.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
So we are in startup. Both stages are now beginning to pressurize for launch. And in a few seconds here, we're going to be hearing the launch director give their final go for liftoff.
LD is go for launch.
And there it is. All systems are go for launch. Let's listen in to terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our 50 Starlink satellites into orbit.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of Falcon 9, Starlink 4-11.
M1D chamber pressures are nominal.
T plus 42 seconds into flight, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from
Power and telemetry
Vandenberg
nominal.
Space Force Base, carrying our stack of 50 Starlink satellites to orbit. And a moment ago, we began to throttle down the engines on the first stage in preparation for max Q. This is where the vehicle will experience the highest amount of pressures during ascent.
Max Q.
And there was max Q. So we have a couple of events happening in quick succession in about a minute. First up, we'll have main engine cutoff, also known as MECO, followed by stage separation, and then second engine start one, also known as SES1. First up, main engine cutoff. This is where all 9 engines on the first stage will shut down in order to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation. During stage separation, the first and second stages will separate from one another. The first stage will make its way back to our targeted landing zone. In this case, it's the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, currently waiting in the Pacific Ocean. And the second stage will continue its journey with the third event, second engine start 1. This is where the single Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will ignite and propel the second stage along with the Starlink satellites into orbit.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC startup.
So we did have successful main
Bearing
engine
separation
cutoff.
confirmed.
Stage separation, second engine start of the Merlin vacuum engine, and you just saw on screen that the fairing halves have been deployed from the top of our second stage. We've been flying reflown fairing halves since 2019, and today's fairings are flight proven, and we're going to be attempting to recover them when they return to Earth as well. So as expected, we got some phenomenal footage of ascent. A couple of views on screen right now. On the left-hand side of your screen is the first stage. It's a view from the top of our first stage looking down. It's heading back to our drone ship in the Pacific Ocean, and on the right-hand side of your screen is a view of that Merlin vacuum engine, glowing red hot, continuing to carry our stack of Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. Again, these are live views. In order for the first stage to make its way back to our drone ship, it needs to execute two burns. The first is an entry burn where 3 of the engines on the first stage will reignite, and this will help to slow down the stage as it re-enters the upper parts of the atmosphere. The second burn for the first stage is the landing burn. This is a single engine burn that will bring the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to land on our drone ship. We're still a few minutes away from those entry and landing burns. For now, we're enjoying some great views of both stages. The engine that you see on screen on the second stage is a little bit different than the engines on the bottom of the first stage. It's actually optimized to perform in the vacuum of space, being able to produce over 220,000 pounds of thrust, compared to the engines on the first stage, which are actually optimized to perform at sea level. They can produce about 190,000 of thrust, 190,000 pounds of thrust each. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we see some puffs of gas. That is nitrogen gas from our attitude control systems. And on the adjacent side of that, those puffs of gas, you can see 2 of our 4 hypersonic grid fins. These help to steer and guide the first stage back to its landing zone. When we do our landing burn, the center engine can also gimbal or tilt, and that also helps to direct the first stage and help it land as well. So we're just under 45 seconds away from the first of those 2 burns, the entry burn on the first stage. Again, it is a 3-engine burn to slow the stage down before hitting the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Things continuing to go smoothly for our second stage.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And you can see on screen, 3 of our 9 engines on the first stage have relit and are currently slowing down that booster. This burn is expected to last about 20 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And with that, that is a successful entry burn. We have 1 more burn to go on the first stage in about a minute.
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
After the landing burn ends and we attempt our landing on our first stage, we're going to be listening for the call out for SECO, also known as second engine cutoff 1, and then a confirmation of good orbit. For today's mission, we are going to be having 2 coast phases. So after we shut off our second stage engine that you see on screen, we'll coast for about 40 minutes, and then we'll actually relight the engine for a few seconds, and then coast again before we deploy the satellites about a little after T+1 hour into the mission.
Stage 1 transonic.
So we did lose video footage of the first stage. This can sometimes happen as the stage is traveling pretty quickly, but we do hear call-outs that
Texas.
it is
Stage 2
continuing
terminal guidance.
to make its way to our drone ship.
Stage 2, FTS is safe.
And here's
Stage
a
1
view
landing burn.
of our drone ship. We just heard the call out that the stage 1 landing burn has started. So if we are successful, this will be the 4th time that this booster has successfully landed.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Hearing callouts that we did get the landing legs deployed, waiting for audio or visual confirmation of that first stage, and there
Stage
it
1
is,
landing confirmed.
right in the middle of our drone ship.
Seco 1.
That is a successful first stage landing, the 4th for this particular first stage booster. So we did hear call out for successful second engine cutoff of the Merlin vacuum engine.
insertion.
And that was the call out we were waiting for as well, nominal orbital insertion. So now the second stage with our satellites are in a coast phase. Next up is second engine start 2, also known as SES2, and second engine cutoff 2, also known as SECO 2, which is scheduled to start around the T plus 53-minute mark. From there, we're going to have payload deploy occur just after the T plus 1 hour mark. Until then, we're going to take a short break, and we'll see you all back here in about 45 minutes. Until then, sit back and enjoy the space jams, and we'll see you soon.
Expected loss of signal, South Texas.
Acquisition of signal, Punta Arenas. Expected loss of signal, Punta Arenas.
struggle to find it. And the technology caught up with them.
Acquisition of signal, Mauritius.
MVAC engine chill is in progress.
Welcome back to the Starlink webcast. If you are just joining us, a quick recap of today's mission. We had successful liftoff from Vandenberg Space Force Base at 9:12 a.m. Pacific time. Then we had successful stage separation, recovered our first stage after its fourth flight on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and had a successful second stage MVAC engine burn. Coming up in a few seconds, we'll have the second stage MVAC engine burn, which will be kicked off by SES-2 or second engine start 2, quickly followed by SECO-2 or second engine cutoff 2. This burn is expected to last just about 2 seconds, and so we'll wait on that. Right now, the second stage is just to the east of Madagascar, heading towards Sri Lanka, and there's a view of the MVAC engine that we are expecting to start back up.
MVAC startup and shutdown.
And there was successful startup and shutdown. Gonna wait for confirmation of a good orbit on the second stage. And so after this, we are gonna coast for a little bit longer before we actually start to deploy our 50 Starlink satellites. But while we wait for that confirmation, I do want to take this time to correct something I said earlier. The white clouds that we saw around the vehicle prior to liftoff is the chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent to maintain pressure in the tanks. So basically, we vent gaseous oxygen, not liquid oxygen. Again, we are waiting on
nominal orbit insertion.
That call out right there, nominal orbital insertion, which confirms that we are in the position we need to be in for the second stage. With that, we're going to take another short break and join you back here just after the T+1 hour mark to catch payload deploy. We will see you soon.
Acquisition of signal, Diego Garcia. Acquisition of signal, multi-use. Expected loss of signal, Mauritius.
And welcome back one final time to our Starlink mission. If you are just joining us, we did have successful liftoff at 9:12 a.m. Pacific time from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We landed our first stage for the 4th time, and we're just now coming out of our second and final coast phase. On screen right now is a view of the second stage Merlin vacuum engine. Prior to that, we did see the stack of 50 Starlink satellites positioned on the top of the second stage, and we are expecting those to deploy in the next couple of seconds. And there were those Starlink satellites that I was mentioning. Again, there are 50 of them on top of the second stage for this mission. Earlier in the webcast, we mentioned that these operate at about 550 kilometers in altitude. It actually takes a couple of weeks for the Starlink satellites to use their onboard thrusters to get to their operational altitude. So once we see them deploy from the second stage, they'll kind of distance themselves from the second stage and then, again, use those thrusters over the next couple of days and weeks to get to where they need to get to. So for those that are interested,
Starlink deploy confirmed.
and just as I was saying that, the Starlink payloads on screen, you can see them separating themselves from the second stage, and off they go. So with that successful deployment of our 50 Starlink satellites, that's going to bring our webcast to a close today. I want to thank the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. And of course, thank you to all of our viewers and all of our Starlink customers using our service at this time. If you are interested in signing up for Starlink, head on over to starlink.com. But thank you again for joining us, and hope you all have a great weekend.